Welcome to the Puget Sound Underground Podcast. This is episode number 008. Today in the studio, we have a special guest. He is the CEO and founder of the Sound Financial Group, an author, a father, and an overall financial genius. Paul Adams, welcome to the podcast. How are you, sir?
Man, I'm so good. I'm so glad to be here.
Absolutely, man. We're really glad to have you in the studio today. I think we're going to have a lot of really great conversation. Let's start at the very beginning. Where did you start this journey in life, Paul?
Man, well, it was snowing on my way here today at home, but I was born in the middle of a blizzard in Billings, Montana. And a little bit different of an upbringing. My mom was a primary breadwinner. Now, I'm 41 years old, so you can kind of put that together. That wasn't the most popular thing back then. But my father raised me at home while my mom worked. And my mom worked for the Department of Energy. Spent a 38-year career there. She was super accomplished, but it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy because it wasn't easy to get promoted as a woman in the Department of Energy back then. So what she would end up doing is she would progress a bit, and then she'd be managing a man that used to manage her. And then when that would happen, her career would stall in that area. So we lived in Billings, we lived in Denver, lived in Eastern Washington, back in the Denver area before being in Las Vegas. So it wasn't like being a military kid where that move maybe happened every 9 months. In some ways, it was harder because it was 5 to 7 years. And then I left all my friends, all of that, and the entire time being raised, stay-at-home dad. That experience changed me because it gave me the ability to always be willing to talk to new people because I had to. As a kid, if you're going to make friends, you got to do that. Every time I moved schools, I was bullied. I'm so thankful for the bullying, which we can talk about if you'd like. And then on top of all of that, being raised at home by a father. So it wasn't a mom going in to meet the principal when I get in a fight. It was my dad. And my dad saying, yeah, if they hit you, then you do whatever you have to do and I'll defend you. So it was a very different way to grow up. So you know how people are like passive-aggressive, all of that? I was aggressive-aggressive. Only if somebody, nicest guy in the world, but only if somebody bullied me, then would I lash out, because that's how I had learned to deal with that. And so that's kind of a little bit about my kind of upbringing up through elementary and high school, and I graduated from high school in Las Vegas.
Nice. Excellent. Vegas must have been fun. Obviously less for a minor, but...
Well, I will say the things that were super interesting about it was all the really cool things you could do recreationally for younger people because of how much of the town had been designed so that people could go and their kids could get entertained. So it was kind of a riot. The weird part was moving from Colorado, and then all those little brochures they hand out on the strip, they are not just on the strip, like they kind of litter out a few blocks from the strip. And I'm like, moving there as a kid from Colorado, looking down and like, what, like naked ladies, what in the world? So that took a little getting used to. Other than that.
Right. What brought you to the Puget Sound?
Well, I had originally built my financial practice in Las Vegas. And at that time, it was branded as Clearline Financial Group. And I had transitioned that to another owner, a guy who I'd grown up and mentored in the business, and became a senior vice president for a very large firm in California, about 170 advisors. And my job was to train those advisors and recruit new advisors. I did that for about 4.5 years and had developed a bit of a national identity. I came up here to the Puget Sound area and moving at that time to Bothell at first because I didn't know where we were going to end up. And when I did that, I took over this firm, rebranded it as Sound Financial Group, and began growing it. A fun story about what happened there before we wrap. But that's what initially brought us was an opportunity. I'd built enough identity that a large financial firm said, yes, please go up to the Seattle area, take over this failing organization, rebrand it, and rebuild it.
That's awesome. Now, I know you naturally like to travel quite a bit and hike. I'm sure the Puget Sound was a pretty welcome location for you to come to. What are your favorite spots here in the Puget Sound to explore?
About the favorite is the North Cascades Highway. So if you live in the greater Seattle area, Puget Sound area, and you haven't taken this drive that's like the closest highway to Canada, it crosses the very last part of the Pacific Crest Trail, and it takes you all the way over to Winthrop, and it snows there so much they actually close it all through the winter. Now, I've driven through Connecticut during the fall, and I still say that is the most beautiful drive in the country.
A lot of beautiful spots to see.
Amen.
You have any cool hiking spots?
My favorite is that I have attempted and been unsuccessful twice was the backpacking into the backside of Stehekin. So if you're familiar with Lake Chelan is this town that's right on this great big long lake that's also super deep. But at the other end of the lake is this little town that can only be accessed by float plane, boat, or through hiking off of this North Cascade Highway. Well, I've tried it twice. Once was actually a purposeful test run where I hiked 35 miles in 2 days. And I was like, okay, that means I can do the mileage. And then I took that prior trip and then made a couple of turns from memory and went 9.5 miles off trail before I got to this new bridge I hadn't seen in my other hikes. And thank goodness I had just gotten a satellite GPS communicator because I was texting my family like, hey, I'm way off. But I did do just short of 20 miles in a day with a backpack and felt pretty good about that. But now we go on a 1-year RV trip come June 1 with our family. It'll technically be 13 months. So I won't be able to do it because the snow won't be off of that trail before that. So it'll be 2 more years till I can do that. Through hike to Stehekin and then have a float plane fly me back to Chelan before somebody drives me back home.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah,
That's quite the Puget Sound adventure there.
Yeah, exactly. And the kind of thing that only happens, or at least I feel like there's so much adventure so close by that can only be enjoyed in the Puget Sound.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. This is a pretty unique spot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've spent a good portion of your life dedicated towards guiding others in financial success. What got you into the financial industry to begin with?
Ego. I was, at the time, 18, and I had started a company prior to this that was kind of silly, but I was delivering salt, like big 50-pound bags of salt. And I had figured out 2 ways to do that. One was in all the retirement communities, I would charge a premium on every bag of salt that cost like $1.50, $1.75 if you buy them by the pallet. And I could deliver them to retirement communities where people had a hard time lifting 50-pound bags of salt for water softeners, which is a big deal. I lived in Las Vegas at the time. And then the second set of customers were shipments by the pallet to casinos, car washes, like one that your listeners would have heard of that was a client of mine was like Harley Davidson Cafe on the Las Vegas Strip. Well, so I had made an agreement with this wholesale salt company when I was 18, and they were called, well, I guess probably shouldn't mention their name given what the rest of the story is going to be like, but they would bring the salt in from Salt Lake. And I was going to town. I had bought a pickup truck for the deliveries I would make myself. I was figured out how to drop ship and just invoice all these other customers. And I remember like opening up Word and being like, I hope there's a template for invoicing because I just sold like 3 people. I don't even know how to bill them yet. I'm probably breaking every law in terms of how I paid myself, etc. And then that company that brought the salt in changed local managers. And they said, where are all these sales coming from? Because they were the only new sales that had happened in a while. And they said, oh, there's this kid who's figured out this thing. So what they did, because they had the fax and contact information because they were drop shipping, and overnight I went out of business because they went to my customers. And I only found out about this because one of the car washes, I called them and I said, I think you're ready for another order. And they said, oh yeah, we do need to order again. But I thought you should know about this competitor. They're selling salt for 25 cents less than you. And you mentioned that your supplier just raised your prices, so you might want to know about this. And I said, could you send that over to me? She faxed it over, and it was my supplier. And I was out of business overnight. And it would just seem so unfair. I even went so far as like, what if I brought a semi-tractor load myself from Salt Lake on a regular basis? And what would that cost? And carrying costs, it was untenable for an 18-year-old. And so I was out of business overnight. But there was an internship I'd heard about through a friend of the family with Northwestern Mutual. And they said, we're going to teach you all about the financial business, etc. And I didn't know anything. I didn't know beans from apple butter about finance at that time. The only thing I had known, and this is a little bit of a silly story. I so appreciate both you and the listeners who have served in the military. I thought that's what I was going to do. And I studied that stuff. I was ready for boot camp, all of that, but they had changed the rules around asthma. And so I wasn't able to enlist. But all I had done from the time I was about 14 years old till 18 is studied finance, because I was like, I'm going to live on base. I'm going to save a ton of money. So I knew a little bit about personal investing and already owned some mutual funds by the age of 18, but didn't know financial planning, etc. And so I went into the interview, and some point in the interview, this guy said, you know what? There's a guy 21 years old out in LA. He's making $250,000 a year. And my entire assessment about whether I should do this or not was I didn't know any 21-year-olds smarter than me. Now, I probably did, but I didn't think they were smarter than me. So if this 21-year-old can do it, I can do it, and I got in the industry. Now, I didn't make $250 by the time I was 21, but I did it by the time I was 22. And that's kind of how my whole career kicked off, where it was so early, and it's kind of unique now to be 41 years old and now having been in this business like 22 years.
Right. It's a huge deal. And of course, you've come a long way since then. You've been featured in quite a few major magazines. Tell us about your features. What was it? Entrepreneur, Forbes, Inc.
Yeah.
I mean, those are huge.
Well, I was interviewed by, I wouldn't go as far as being featured
Gotcha.
yet. But I was featured by, speaking of Puget Sound, by 425 Business Journal. And with each one of those, where they all kind of stemmed from was one. That's why I'd never underestimate a single opportunity to tell your story, because I had done a TED Talk type talk for just the entrepreneurs organization in Seattle here. And that stemmed into an article in their Octane magazine. And then from that is how the articles got picked up by Forbes, Inc., Entrepreneur, Small Business Trends, and then ultimately 425 magazine. All that came out of this idea that for business owners, you can never have financial independence on that business balance sheet. No matter how big or how successful the business is, if you can't transfer that value to your personal balance sheet, it's not either or between the two. It's just that you have to build both. And most business owners get tranquilized by the perceived value of their business, and they don't do enough to build their personal balance sheet, and then get shocked when they can't sell the business for enough to live off that money for the rest of their life. But it's too late by the time they find that out. And it was that concept that really caught on in those publications.
That's huge. It's absolutely huge. And we're definitely going to dive into some more of those ideologies here in a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your podcast. You've co-hosted a couple of podcasts. Tell us about those and what they are, where we can find it.
Yeah, so one is the one where we teach business owners how to be better with their money. But we do it in a way that's not the kind of salesy you get from MSNBC, CBS, the person on the radio who has a show. Because every single one of them, you are their product that they sell to their advertisers. You are not the client. And how you know you're not the client is if you listen to the advice on one of those shows and it didn't work out for you, and then you go to sue them in a court of law, they're like, wait a second, you mean you called into a radio show, talked to somebody kind of famous for like 30 seconds, and then they told you to do something and you did it? Yeah. Case dismissed. Like, that would be it. And so what we do instead is it's certainly longer than those 30-second clips, but we teach a bunch of different concepts. And for me, part of it was ethical, why I needed to do that podcast. And we also put that one up on YouTube if people are more visual. Though here's the big issue is we now charge a fee up front to work with clients. We have an application process for people to become clients. We don't make an offer to everybody because it's the ethics. We're going to charge a fee up front. So I need to see enough about somebody's finances to know if we can bring enough value that I feel okay about charging them. Part one. But then part two is I feel like we're on a mission to help people look differently at money, which means I'm going to have to say no to some people who we could have helped. We just couldn't have helped them enough to justify the fee that we charge. So then we can send people and say, you don't have to accept our offer. You don't need to apply. We've already given all this away for free. So if you resonate, great. If not, there's over 170 episodes now, not counting the books and the interviews that you can go get elsewhere, and you can do it for free. You might have to invest 40 hours of listening and studying, but you can probably get 75% of where we would have taken you. And so that's the reason for Your Business, Your Wealth. The other is Leadership Impact, which I host with a woman named Carrie Granger. She was, one of her big stories that I love a lot was her deployment to Balad. after leaving the Air Force Academy, which is, I know, for you, it's a little bit like the country club of the armed forces.
100% is. 100%.
And
I love that place, by the way.
and she's admitted as much, but what had happened with her is that she's an amazing woman. One of the top leadership coaches in the entire country, or transformational leadership for large Fortune 500 companies and government agencies. But Carrie said, she couldn't do as well what I do, which I call in a podcast is speaking to the darkness, especially when you're talking about concepts all on your own. Like you and I, at least you and I are talking to each other right now. But when you just jump on a mic and start talking about philosophy, et cetera, it's a lot like being a speaker in a large venue where all the lights are on you and you can't quite hear people in the audience and you can't see their reactions. It's a much different environment, and that podcast is like that. So her and I are in conversation. I call me her resident caveman. She's super smart about leadership development, and then I break it down to be a little bit easier. And that one's called Leadership Impact with the Granger Network.
Those are awesome, and I've seen a handful of both of those. They were super good podcasts, so definitely going to keep on that one.
Thank you.
Let's jump into some financial talk here.
Yeah.
We had a conversation before where you called retirement a bad word, and kind of.
I wish it was just 4 letters long, so I could say it's a 4-letter word.
The really bad word, right? But you have a theory of moving, instead of thinking about retirement, you move more towards a work optional life.
Indeed. So if you think about the word retirement, you go back to, say, 1937 when they really rolled out Social Security. That's the first time we started using the word retire to apply to human beings. See, prior to that, you would retire an old piece of equipment. You would retire a horse to the glue factory. Or you would grab your scotch in a cup and retire to the den for the evening. That meant I'm no longer of any use. We just didn't apply that to people. Remember your American history classes? They would say, did Ben Franklin, any of our forefathers be like, we're retiring now, we're not going to bring any more value to the universe? No. They continue to form a country well into their old age. Well, look at what we do today. Most entrepreneurs aren't interested in retiring. In fact, most people, even in the armed forces, who have a very set date of retirement, it's like, I am retiring, meaning I'm taking this income and I'm going to go do something else. Retirement is not what we thrive on as human beings. And for most entrepreneurs, they definitely don't. So what we started to talk about is that retirement, no wonder nobody wants to plan for it. It's a terrible idea. But what everybody does want with some conversation is, I want to have financial independence for the sake of funding a work optional lifestyle. And so it's no longer about just building it up in financial tools. It's buying some financial tools and doing things like whether somebody invests in real estate or they have some amazing other business that they're going to build. Whatever it is that they do, we just need to create enough passive income that they no longer have to work for money. Live off of that passive income. Now, when you reach what we call definite financial independence, it's when that passive income can pay all of your expenses. And then you may continue to work. And when you do, it's just 100% savings rate now. Because if you were saving 100% of your earned income, regardless of what you do for a living right now, business owner or employee, how easy is it to have that next negotiation? Whether you're negotiating a lease, negotiating a large business deal, negotiating a buyout of your business, or as we have a client that's literally going to go into a major company this year and say, hey, I only want to do this part of my job that's super specialized. I'll work for you guys about 1 day a week, but I still want a little over half of my total salary and benefits package. And the only reason he can go in and have that negotiation is because he doesn't need the income, because he's already has the ability to save nearly 100% of what he makes.
Changes the entire conversation.
Changes
everything.
It's
a very different perspective. Mm-hmm. I have this conversation with a lot of people in the very early stages of this conversation where, the American dream was retire at 65. Right? I mean, that's what we've been bred as a society to. That's just, hey, at 65, you're going to retire, which I think a lot of people now are finding out that that's not the case anyway, that are there. But, I'm a firm believer in it's not about your pile of cash when you hit 65. In fact, I have no interest in retiring at 65. I'd rather retire at 40.
Indeed.
Right? And so...
Or hit work optional lifestyle.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Yeah, bad word.
I'm going to listen to future podcasts and see if you say it that way.
Exactly, right. Yeah. But this is, for me, it's about cash flow. And of course, in real estate, it's
Indeed.
about, getting rentals and having that passive income coming in. But I love that mindset of we're ditching the word retirement.
Indeed. And think about the simple, like there were advertisements for years of people carrying around their number as if that's the number you need at age 65.
I've seen those, yeah.
That, like, how many points should you have on the scoreboard as a football team at halftime? Well, it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter because there's half a game left to play. If you have a couple who are healthy at age 65, they have a 50% chance of making it to age 93 and a 50% chance of living longer than 93. Wrap your head around that. That means our money in our old age will have to last as long or longer than it took us to accumulate all the capital. That means you can't pretend like that number at age 65 matters, because what matters is the cash flow for the rest of your life and whether or not that cares for your conditions of life or what's important to you to live the rest of your life the way you want to.
100%. What do you see? I mean, you get to see a lot of different situations, a lot of different people. Trend-wise, what do you see people making the biggest mistake on?
I think people we work with a lot are what I call Henrys, high earners, not rich yet. And so these are the folks that make $300,000 to $2 million of income a year, and yet they don't have the assets that could duplicate that income on their balance sheet. So we're helping them accomplish that. Well, for most people, they don't actually have a strategy for what they want the future to be for them. What they do is they have surplus because they're making good money. So they set it aside, set it aside, set it aside, and then there's some opportunity. Like, oh, there's a piece of real estate, and somebody shared with me about it, and so I'm going to go buy that piece of real estate. And that eats up that surplus they saved. And then the surplus builds up again, and then some financial product person comes to sell them something, and they buy that thing. And they're kind of collecting, but it's a collection in a junk drawer financially. Or if you were watching Breaking Bad when it was released, it's like the pallet of cash in a storage unit.
Yes.
And this, if you go back and watch that, there's like this 3-minute conversation of how much is enough. And in our application, when clients fill it out, potential clients, I should say, fill that out, it says right on there, do you know how much capital at work is going to be required for you to have financial independence? And almost no one has an answer. Now think about this. This is definitely a trend, but it's one we should all be aware of. Because what do we do every day? We get up out of our bed, we head to work, we do our jobs the best we can, we do a good job of taking care of our family, and we save some money to get to a number we haven't even defined yet. That would be like jumping in my car right now, and people are like, where are you going? And I go, east. And they're like, what are you trying to get to? And I'm like, a place that looks like this.
East. We're trying to get to east.
It's like it's going to have trees and some rocks and maybe some tall buildings. And now we haven't even defined it's New York. And we haven't defined how far it is or how long it's going to take. And yet we would never do that in a car. But people are doing that every day with their money. People listening right now, walking their dog or doing dishes or driving to work, are doing so with no idea how much capital it's actually going to take. They just know it's going to be more than what they have now. So that's part one. Part two is people also haven't articulated what kind of life they want to live today, like really articulate it. So all the advertisers, everybody coming in has a narrative of more than what I have now. I currently have this, but a Tesla would be nice. I currently have this house, but I'd really like something that's bigger. And it's always something more than what I have now, because if they don't articulate, this is what I want my future to look like, then they can't really be truly satisfied when they arrive at it. So those are the two major trends I see that hold people back. And everybody else says, well, it's this tactic in investing. And none of those things erode people's wealth as much as not having a true destination and awareness of how much capital it's going to take in the future for them to be financially independent, and an inability to articulate what's actually going to make me happy in my lifestyle today for me and my spouse to get on the same page about that.
It's a huge deal, having a plan. I mean, that's something that we talk a lot about when you're building investment portfolios. Mm-hmm. You need to, and of course the military teaches 90% preparation, 10% execution,
yes,
right?
Yes.
And that really does speak to, hey, we need to have a roadmap here. And to your point, your analogy was really solid. I use it a lot, is if you're going to go on a road trip, you're not just going to get in the car and go. You're going to have an idea of where you're going to stop, what roads you're going to take. Like, you have a plan, and that makes it like we're not thinking about it.
Even if you're loosey-goosey about it, you're still going to have an end destination. And so many people don't even have the end destination.
100%. 100%. So building a roadmap. What about you in the beginning? I mean, we weren't always at this position here as CEO. And, what did you do in the beginning to kind of establish that roadmap? How did you decide what kind of life you wanted to live?
That's a great question. So for me, I remember when I lived in Las Vegas, and the biggest thing I was concerned about was I just need to save a bunch of money every single month and had no real destination, just like every client. And then I got introduced to a book after I moved up here, actually. So this is back in 2012. And the book was called Stop Acting Rich and Start Living Like a Real Millionaire. Now, I really wish, the author's name is Dr. Thomas Stanley, died tragically in a car accident in August 2015. Rest his soul. He also wrote a much more popular book called The Millionaire Next Door. Yeah. And what he did in this book that was more powerful than the first book is that was about people at $1 million. But you and I both know $1 million in net worth doesn't do the job. So if you're listening right now, you think $1 million of net worth does the job, start listening to Your Business, Your Wealth, and you'll find out it's not enough. Although he took and said, well, based upon your income, the amount of money you're setting aside, and when it is you want to have financial independence, and are you on trend to have enough on your balance sheet to replace your income? And he called that balance sheet wealth. And then he articulated in the book how so many people are trying to buy little pieces of he calls the glittering rich lifestyle. These are the people that are worth over $20 million and have over $2 million a year of income. Those people, we can't have the 4 cars they have. We can't have the $10 million house that they have. We can't do any of those things, but we can do some of those things. Now, here's the best example of that. I was at a cigar shop with one of my employees long ago. And when I was at the cigar shop, now I'm buying all the cigars to go back to the hotel with, but this one guy, perfectly happy to let me pay hundreds of dollars for the cigars we're bringing back for this bigger group. And he says, hey, by the way, do you have a nice cigar cutter? Like something in the $75 to $100 range. That's a perfect example. Little tiny piece, a little Calibri cigar cutter that costs $100. So he has a little piece of the glittering rich lifestyle, and then he goes back to the hotel and is able to cut these cigars with this super nice thing. And he's like, yeah, no big deal. I just bought it. And it's like, wait a second. And I said to him, like I had given him this book. And I said, what are you doing? He said, well, I just want a really nice one. I was like, he's giving me 8 cigar cutters for free. I'll give you half. You can have all of them when we're done. He's like, yeah, but those are the cheap ones. They're going to break. There's 8 of them. If you don't lose them, they'll probably last you the rest of your life. And that is the perfect example. So people don't get everything, but they get one of those things. They get just the boat that the glittering rich can get, or just the car the glittering rich can get, or just they'll take the vacation the glittering rich can get. Now, they do all of those things, but we buy pieces of their lifestyle. No wonder the Kardashians are so popular on Instagram or wherever else. People are looking for, what little things can I do? I was at Starbucks this morning and 2 women getting on the bus. One of them had a Calvin Klein bag because it's the only part of the glittering rich lifestyle she could afford. And yet it's eroding their capacity to build balance sheet wealth. So for me, that's when everything changed. And I think of in the Bible where it talks about Paul and the idea of cultivating contentment. And the idea is that we really have to be aware of what's going to make us happy. So we, after kind of going through this process, we got rid of what I refer to as our McMansion. And, so 4,000 square feet, lots for my wife to maintain, lots of space to lose kids in. And what I mean by lose kids is I'm super worried about my kids are teenagers with their own devices. So we sold that house, got a ranch-style house, very close to some friends of ours, like 2 doors down on a cul-de-sac. Which I didn't think living on a cul-de-sac would be that good, but man, please tell all of your clients with small kids, do not underestimate how darn good a cul-de-sac is. So now we've been there for several years, and it's just amazing. Oh, by the way, it's a 1,400 square foot house. Father-in-law lives with us, and 3 kids with me and my wife. We now have chosen to live radically within our means, which gives us a lot of autonomy, which is why we are queued up to leave on our 13-month RV trip starting in June 1. And the whole reason we can do that is because of both the business and the way we built it, which is all virtual, like we meet with clients all over the country via Zoom meeting, and the ability of so radically within our means, that it does. We can keep the house and then still maintain a lifestyle on the road for a year in our little RV that looks like a bus.
That's such a huge thing. And I do have conversations with a lot of people also that it is about what makes you happy, right? Because a lot of people think they had this idea, and I think this is all driven by society and media, and there's a lot of different reasons for this, but people, it is more. That's such a good way to put it, is it isn't one thing, it's just more of something. But it's when you really truly reflect on what makes you happy, it changes the conversation quite a bit. It allows you to really aggressively pursue that, because now you can treat this whole situation like a puzzle, and now we can move those puzzle pieces around to make them fit the narrative that we want it to, which is this is the end game. This is where I'm headed. It's a super big deal.
And it's easy for people to still say, what's going to make me happy? And it still falls into a version of more. So what we do is to get people off of that is say, let's talk about two types of numbers. One is sufficiency. What could life look like? And you could still have a good life. It wouldn't be the ideal life. It wouldn't be everything that you'd want, but it would be a good life. That's enough safe neighborhood, enough medical care, enough healthy food, enough time to go see grandkids, whatever the thing is for you. That's enough. It'll do, as John Dewey would say, as an American philosopher from years ago. Then there's surplus, which is some luxuries, not all luxuries. Flying first class sometimes, periodically going to Nordstrom's instead of Macy's, that kind of thing. But figure out your sufficiency, because when we do the sufficiency of what's good enough, it resets us a little bit to go, wait, man, I'm already living in so much surplus. And then that's where you can begin to cultivate that contentment. And cultivating contentment is one of the best wealth building strategies you could have. Just ask Warren Buffett, who's lived in the same house for like 50 plus years now and drives a car that is so old, I am sure it is unsafe.
Which he still drives it, by the way.
He still drives it. Yeah.
Was he 90 something?
Oh my gosh. And you know where he gets his breakfast every day? McDonald's every day.
That can't be healthy.
That guy loves the dollar menu. I don't know. I think he probably does it differently than you and I. The rare instance where we might go to McDonald's, we're like 7 Big Macs because we're not going to do it very often. He's like, every day is just 1 Egg McMuffin. He's good.
Totally. He's got a wild story. His book was like 32-hour audiobook. Oh. It was worth it.
When you're that old, I mean, it takes a lot of life you got to talk about.
There's definitely a lot to chat about there. He's got some interesting models, though, for sure. I mean, building a business is not an easy thing. Mm-hmm. There's always a lot of challenges. Can you speak a little bit to, some of the roadblocks that you might have run into? What were the challenges that you've had in starting and owning a business?
Well, I'll start with the regular little challenges, and then you tell me when you're ready, and I'll talk about like the nuke that went off in my office one day. I think some of the little things are the things that you don't anticipate. And I'll give like a easy example from one of my clients. He's built a really successful company, has a strong chance of a $40 million exit this year. And people do not realize, like especially in this whole world of the media and those freaking billionaires and millionaires, and they have no idea what the life looks like for these folks. Like they give up nearly everything to produce those outcomes. And everybody in their family is all in, and there's no guarantee the spouse is supporting and making sure the kids are okay and apologizing where they need to their community because that person can't be there. And I'm like, I don't think a lot of these politicians could walk around and carry his briefcase with all the travel and all the phone calls and the 20-hour days it's taken him to build this company. So that's kind of the first one. I watched those breakdowns left and right everywhere now I see it in my clients too. I've seen everything from sexual harassment, where it is a male employee coming after a female executive in a company just because he was angry about a demotion. And you know what happens when you're the CEO of that company? It's like, wait, how big could this lawsuit be? You mean it could end me? Well, now it is all consuming. I've had little things like somebody go to jail. Right? Like I'm not talking like anything financial. It's like somebody had too much to drink somewhere. And now you as the owner of that company have to be in a conversation you didn't anticipate being in. Having somebody, end up with an addiction issue that you didn't know about, and then helping them journey through that and heal because you care about your employees. All that stuff is so, so difficult. And then on top of all those things that you almost get, like even as you ask me right now, I'm like, well, I'm so used to all the little problems that to me, it doesn't even show. A vendor changes how they're paying things or how you require you pay them. And it takes up a ton of time. The biggest is the amount of regulatory compliance that's required all the time. And it is like being a slowly boiled frog to realize how much it takes. And early on, you're just breaking every rule. So if anybody out there is listening and you're hoping to get it all right when you start, it's like, no, you basically end up committing misdemeanor after misdemeanor, because I forget to pay this tax, didn't know I needed to do this, what did I need a permit for? Are you talking? Like, all that stuff happens. And then I'm in a highly regulatory environment. I pay an entire team whose job it is to make sure I'm following all the rules I have to. It's an all outsourced team of attorneys that we pay just to make sure we're okay. But then there's the nuclear bombs that can go off. And one day, July, it's mid-July. I don't remember if it was this. I think it was the 16th or 17th of July 2016. Now, I had built this financial firm. I had moved up here to build, and I'd built it in partnership with a large insurance company and securities company. And I'm not going to name names, but find me on LinkedIn, connect with me, and you'll see. And as I did that and built that firm, we went from basically like 2 advisors, and I had to fire all the employees, because the actual staff employees, because they just weren't able to do the job. Rehired everybody, and then we got back up around 40-some people in about 4.5 years. Now, the way my contract worked with them is I had 5 years to build this organization, and after 5 years, it's like a franchise, and after that, the franchise kicks over, and I totally own the territory. And then it's very difficult to get rid of me. Well, 4.5 years in, we had built one of the most successful firms they had in the country during this incubator period. But I was kind of tough to manage. The what I'll affectionately refer to as hogs, home office guys, would come out periodically, and I was, again, just a little tough to deal with, because they'd be like, well, we invited you to a meeting. I'm like, I'm already busy for the next 3 weeks. Well, when we ask for a meeting, you're supposed to take it. I was like, what do are these other people you have elsewhere in the country actually working? Like, how can they have time on their calendar when you just put it there? You got to give me like a month's notice to put something on my calendar, or I might be available, but it's going to be by chance. And those kind of things frustrate the daylights out of them. And they came in, and it was supposed to be, I was 6 weeks short of my contract flip, what they called flipping. And that contract flip meant I got about $750,000 of deferred comp. And then the business value, which I would estimate that time about 1.3, 1.4 million, would have moved from effectively their balance sheet to mine. And they came in, and one guy was supposed to be, the other guy I didn't kind of expect. Kind of odd. They sent the 2 biggest home office guys to come do this conversation. And we walked back to my office, sat down, and we're just kind of chatting, niceties, et cetera. And I said, hey, can I ask you a question? So, yeah. I said, elephant in the room? How come you're here? Well, we're terminating your contract today.
Whoa.
Whew. Now, to put in perspective, I was an expert individual advisor when I lived in Las Vegas. When I took that role as senior VP in California, I said I'm going to give it 10 years to go into management, which I had previously, like a lot of people do that are expert individuals, you kind of poo-poo management. I'm like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do no more than 10 years. And I'm going to see if I can do it. And I was pretty dang good at it. We had grown this operation from sub 2 million to 2.7 million at the end of 2015. And I thought the worst thing that could happen is maybe they move out my contract date, my flip date. And they came in and terminated it. Now, to wind the clock back, they had been really strange with me about the prior 90 days. And I thought, I think somebody's trying to really trip me up and implode this thing. And I think I knew who it is. I spent the first 30 days of that 90 days so angry with the entire mindset of I'm going to make this firm so big that I can crush these people's careers. That was like that internal, going all the way back to my childhood, the aggressive side of me. And again, about a month into that 90-day period, I was at church. And the pastor said, what in your life have you not put on the altar to Jesus, like really trusted him with? And I realized I'd done it in all kinds of ways. I've held somebody at gunpoint. Even in that moment, I'm like, God, this is in your hands. Please don't make me have to shoot this guy and let the police get here quickly. I've had my kids have life-threatening surgeries. And I do everything I know how to do, get the best doctors, best situation for the family, And then after that, it's in God's hands. And I've done that everywhere. Even with high net worth clients, when I was such a young person, it was like, I will tell them the truth, and then it's in God. It wasn't even in my hands that I met these people, so it's in God's hands anyway, so I'll let him decide whether or not they transact with me. And that kept me from being any kind of nervous. But I'd never done it with the entire business. I always was smart enough and had a good enough team. And I was like, okay, God, I will 100% trust you in how this goes. And that was pretty well at peace the next 60 days. And so when they gave me the news, I said, okay. Now, what I found out later, they thought they were going to have a serious security risk on their hands because I'd also been affiliated with this financial institution in one way or another for about 18 years prior to this. And I said, okay. Well, I guess you're going to want this big office for whoever you're trying to recruit to take over this organization. So I guess I'll just take one of those offices down the hallway. I'm fine being a little one. Doesn't matter to me. Or do you want me in a cube? And they're like, what? I said, well, I've been doing business with you guys for like 8. Why would I stop doing business with you? You guys have decided you don't want me to own this office. And you have the contractual right to do that. But why would I disrupt all of my clients and everything else? They're like, oh, and they had to call the home office attorneys. Like, can we let him still have a contract with us, still be an advisor? And I said, so they got back and they're like, yeah, we can't stop that. So, but you got to be out of the building by 11. And I said, okay. But the strength that's like, God is putting this in front of me. He's going to teach me something. And I left that day. If anybody's ever considered joining something like the Entrepreneurs Organization, my forum meeting was that day. And they were gracious enough that we abandoned all the conversations we had slated to have in the agenda that day. My life had blown up that morning, and they just let me talk it all out. But Wednesday morning, that was Tuesday, Wednesday morning, I just went back. Now, I had no personal book of business anymore. I had probably 4 people that thought they were my clients in particular, because every time I attracted a client, what did I do? Give them to one of my advisors. So I had literally no business, total restart mid-2016. And in doing that, I was super angry for months. And I'm one of those people that can sleep through anything. It's like a superpower. Like if you popped a round off in the room that I was in, I wouldn't wake up unless the bullet hit me. That kind of sleeper. And I was waking up like every 2.5 hours with the same full adrenaline dump you get in a fist fight. Like, I wasn't afraid of performing for my family, not afraid of our finances or our future, but I was so righteously angry that they did this, and I didn't know why. Literally said they wouldn't tell me why. And when the door was closed to just me and the one other guy, I said, why is this? He says, you know, Paul, you're not a very good political animal. That was it. $2 million in my career in the last 10 years of my life. I'm not a very good political animal. Okay. So every time I would wake up that way, I would say, God, this is me not trusting you somehow. And it took until about mid-November that I could sleep through the night again. But then we relaunched the business, and now we've been, certainly successful and continued success since then. But those are the things that really happen for business owners. And I think for the most part, nobody talks about them. We talk about them in the Entrepreneurs Organization all the time with each other. But it's not like people tell these things to their customers. They don't go on a podcast and talk about it. And probably the only reason I talk about it is I want people to know the solace they can find in faith in moments like that. Because then what I did, because of the faith I had, I was watching for what is it God is opening up for me. Now, what came out of that? Near the end of that year, my dad had a very close call health-wise. And I was able to be at the hospital with him for weeks. And he was 87 years old at the time. The next year, because I had so much more autonomy and freedom with now just a few advisors and a few staff, not 40-some people, trying to grow to 200, I just took my family on an RV trip to Wyoming for like 40 days. Now, the beauty of that, my dad had an oxygen machine, but with the onboard generator and the house-like conditions inside there, he could make the trip with us. We stayed out there together with family. My kids got to know my father so much better because of their age, all of that. And he passed away later that year. Those are all memories I would have never had if it weren't for him. And now I have the freedom and autonomy to travel for a year in my RV. And if I was now at 100 plus advisors, I probably wouldn't have the profitability potential because it's a very different situation on total revenue versus profitability. I will probably be as profitable, if not more profitable, this year than I would have leading a really large organization. And my life is so much better I can engage with the people I care about, both inside and outside my business better. And now I have this freedom to go do something that most people never get the chance to do, and certainly not in their 40s.
What a story. I mean, wow. But what an outcome also.
Yeah.
This brings up an interesting question. In the beginning, when you were first getting started, how did you view failure? How did you view things that went sideways that didn't go the way that you anticipated them to go? In the moment. I'm not talking about a day later. I'm saying in the moment when things were going sideways, what was your mind state like? What were you thinking?
Okay, so one thing I did that I think was different than most is probably just a lot of my mom and dad's influence on me of I'm responsible for this. It's not anybody else's fault. Because every time something was someone else's fault, I had no control. And I'll never forget, I was probably one of the biggest things that happened that changed everything is I hired my first coach when I was like 20. And somebody said, you should hire this guy. And I remember, I think I was paying him $250 a month, which was just like so much money, felt like. And he let me record the calls, and I would listen to them throughout the month and then get the next one or listen to that one 4 or 5 times before the next one. But what he taught me was if you put the control of anything outside of you, where do you put the control to change it is outside of you. So in some ways, that's a lot harder because it's so much easier to be like, I won't curse, but like, forget them. And it's their fault. They're an idiot, all that. And frankly, the first organization I started with, and this is not unique to Northwestern Mutual, but in many of those organizations, the way they get you to stay psychologically tough to get through all the failure is that the client is an idiot. Really. And sometimes, and you can hear it, like when I'm at industry events, I can hear the advisors that were raised in certain cultures where they brought in a new advisor because that's how they keep you psychologically tough. It's much harder to hit each of those instances say, what did I do wrong? What could I do different? So every time after a failure, I was either like, well, this is either something about me as a person that caused this or something I did or something I didn't know. And that was hard. So I remember like early in the career trying to overcome that because that can weigh you down mood-wise. So I would leave those really hurt because I knew it was my fault that that person didn't become a client. And so what I had to do, I remember 50 Cent was pretty popular at the time. And the one thing about gangster rap music, period, is that there is no lack of confidence in any of those lyrics. And so that's what I would crank in my, because that was back when I was still driving to go see everybody. I couldn't get anybody to come in and see me. I thought the guys were gods that would get, clients to come in and see them. And what I would do is listen mostly to 50 Cent or Biggie. And what that did for me was like I didn't have swagger to be able to walk in with confidence, so I'd borrow theirs. And it was really, really difficult to have the balance of I'm going to be deeply self-reflective, look at my own faults and find ways to repair them, and yet show up with enough confidence to a client that they would realize that they could trust me with their money and in their financial decisions, that what I was saying was accurate. I think that was the hardest part.
It's huge. And I know a lot of people, and I think I'm in the same boat. Gangster rap has always been a big motivation, and like it is something that you can tap into. It's a very unique world.
Yeah, I mean, like
sure.
Even if you look at somebody like Kanye, like that guy sitting across the table from the president of the United States, and he's like, man, I gotta tell you, you gotta get rid of that Air Force One. That thing is no good for you. This thing is so much better. And it's like the unbelievable confidence to do that to the leader of the most powerful most powerful country on the planet with like no problem.
Except for the fact that he believes he's the most powerful person on the planet, but
maybe, but he thought that.
Right.
He thought that all the way back. If you listen to some of the old stories of like the first time he was mentioned on a Jay-Z track, and he stands up in the room full of these other rap people, and he stands up and he says, roll that back. And people say early on, having met him, that he walked with swagger from the very beginning and an unbelievable confidence from the very, very, very beginning. Now, maybe a lot of people do that and they crash and burn and we don't know about them, so that's survivorship bias. But it's pretty amazing. I don't know, have you heard the Aziz Ansari
Oh,
bit?
of course. Yeah.
Where he's like, I went to Kanye's house, and he's like, he's got Kanye music bumping on his home Sonos stereo system, like, and he says, man, these beats are dope. It's like, and they are. But you don't expect them to say that. So I just want to tell you, I think this podcast is dope so far.
Nice. Let's talk a little bit about side hustles. We know a lot of people who, they're grinding out a W-2 lifestyle, and the answer to how do we increase savings, how do we invest more, is let's pick up something that we're passionate about that we can turn into a potential business. What are some of the best side hustles you've ever seen?
Well, first off, I would attack the passion thing, because I think that hurts mostly millennials, because they haven't seen enough difficulty in their lives yet. And they're getting older. And they're getting older in one of the best economies and markets we've ever had here in the last decade. The last 3 years have been exceptional. And so they don't know a lot of difficulty yet, in their adult lives anyway. So for one, I say don't worry so much about the side hustle that you're passionate about. Do the one that works. Because I'll tell you, you could probably give me the worst job in the world, but if it allows me to provide for myself and my family and still have all the objectives that I want, I could crawl through a mile of crap if that was the job every day and feel pretty good about it if on the back end it actually gave me the time I want with my family. I'm not talking about just money, time I want with my family, autonomy to do things that I want with my kids, and when I choose to work, etc. That's the big difference. So I more think of the side hustles as it's just working more than 40 hours. That used to be normal. So if you're listening right now and I need to get a side hustle, you haven't even hustled yet. It's not this is not a side hustle. You haven't been hustling. I thought about it yesterday. I finished my last client meeting a little after 5 o'clock, and I mainly am packed about 3 days a week, and the Mondays and Fridays are very loose because we're not going to work those days in the 1 year trip. But I'm looking at it, I'm like, well, wait a second. I got up in the morning and started prepping for my day at 5 with my first cup of coffee. And then I worked out for 30 minutes and then came back. And so basically the whole day, other than the workout and the shower, I was working. And I love it. But I did 40 hours in 3 days. And I do that every week. And a young man reached out to me and said, hey, I'm wondering what I should do. I don't have a good role model. I really would love to. And I was like, well, how many jobs do you have right now? And he's like, well, one where I work 32 hours a week, and then I do a little bit of this on the side. And I was like, well, you're not even working yet. Why don't you do some, get up to 60 hours a week doing something first, anything. So, but I do have an interest in these different side hustles, which are, we used to just go do other jobs. And now people want to slate them all as side hustles. The benefit of many side hustles is then you get the 1099 income, which means you never pay retail for a laptop again because the IRS subsidizes it with tax deductions. You never pay for your car again the same way because of the tax deduction, et cetera. So side hustles, I think, are most valuable in their capacity to give you 1099 income to move into, as Robert Kiyosaki would say, to the business owner side of the cash flow quadrant. So some that I've seen. Now, our clients don't do side hustles in the regular mode, so I'm going to be talking about a few of them as ones that I've just looked at because I'm interested in them. One was lime charging. I was riding one around. We took our kids to the Everett Philharmonic, and I was kind of keeping the kids busy. So me and my daughter just jumped on a lime scooter and drove, and it died. So how do they charge these? I just didn't know, and the concert hadn't started yet, so I'm looking it up on my phone, and then it's people go around and charge them. They call them juicers because they're putting juice in them. That was funny. And then another page about how to maximize it, which I think is the second thing. Don't do any of the side hustles without research. Because other people have already hacked these and how to make the most out of them in other cities. So use those hacks. But somebody will do Instacart, Uber, whatever, and then just do whatever the company tells you to do. Well, that means you're holding their strategy, not yours. So I sit there, look at it, and it's do these types of charging at these times, buy extra chargers. You can charge this many. And so I think what we figured out was you can get paid about $100 a night by charging them. And maybe with some tricks, you can get to about $150. You spend an hour picking up these scooters after work every day, just after dark, and then you got to get them back on the street by 7 a.m. So that could happen before and after work, a little bit competitive, and you can make some side money. It's $10.99, so that then you get the opportunity to get write-offs. So that's one. Second is an Uber guy that I met in Palm Springs, I think it was. He may be out of business now with AB5. We'll see.
Right.
But this guy was sharp. He was previously in commercial real estate. I got totally fed up with how difficult it was. And he was making money, but he's like, life was hard. Like, what's great? When I get out of this seat, I'm done. So what he's done is every time he picks up at the airport, that's his prospecting. And he gives them his card. Now, I'm probably breaking Uber's terms of service, but he's willing to risk it. He has seat covers that say, I always appreciate cash tips, like on the back of his seats, which at first I thought, that doesn't look professional. But I'm like, he's an Uber driver. I'm perfectly happy to save the money. This is why I'm not in a limo right now. So he drives me. Now, he says, call me when you want back to the airport. I'll give you a flat fee. That sounded pretty good to me. So I called him when I needed to be picked up. A bunch of us had gone off-site for this thing to watch a Seahawks game, and then we came back to the hotel. I came back early because I go to bed by 9 every night. And they're still watching the game. So I get an Uber back, call him. He picks me up, and I start asking him questions. How do you do this? It's a little different. Just break the terms of service, et cetera. He says, one of the things I do is I go around and I find out where all the conventions are and when they let out. And I find out where they are because I get scotch for all of the bell captains at the major hotels that host conferences every Christmas. And I stay in communication with them. And I do things for my clients that other people won't do. And I have about 4 or 5 other drivers that are perfectly happy to take gigs when I can't. And I make very little money on them, but I know I'm going to get the next phone call. I'm like, oh. And I made a pretty ridiculous request because I wanted to fly out early, but I made a commitment to go hiking with a bunch of people outside of where we were. So I said, I need to leave my bag at the hotel. I need you to pick it up at the bell cap. Then meet me at the trailhead. We'll be done with our hike by this time, and then I need to go directly to the airport. He says, I said, could you do that? He says, yeah, okay if I charge you $60 instead of $45? Yeah. And he was willing to do all that. And they gave me more time to talk to him. And so he's developed this now as an Uber driver with a bunch of cash earnings, $8,500 a month.
Wow.
Now, for most Uber drivers, they're like, what in the world? How does he do this? I was like, well, because he works. Now, people call it hustle. And the reason I don't like using the term hustle is you got like Gary Vaynerchuk out there, the hustle porn.
Yep.
People flip through and they're like, oh, yeah, I just got to work hard. Like, no, working hard only worked in the labor tradition. When your job was to be part of the machine, you pull this lever and then it presses this thing down. Or you're mowing a lawn. Like you push harder on a lawnmower, you can actually get more lawn done. When you're writing a blog post, you can't type harder. When you are shooting a video or a podcast, you can't talk harder. You have to now have knowledge and begin to think differently and think about the customer and the offer you're making, et cetera. So frankly, for most people, I'd be like, just work hard at a particular job that you're at and then go learn some stuff that other people aren't learning, because what you need is uncommon knowledge to transact in the marketplace in a different way, because that's what's going to get you uncommon levels of income. And to say uncommon levels of income, it's like average income in this country is about $47,000 a year. Only about 10% of people make over $150,000. So that means if you're making over $150,000 as a household, you got to outcompete 90% of people. And you're not going to do that by working harder, because if you're only appreciated in some way for the neck down, then there's a limit to the kind of compensation you can get. So go out and learn something other people aren't learning. Become a competitive student beyond whatever your traditional education was. And that should be the hustle you're in 100% of the time, is the learning, not all the working. And you got to work your butt off a lot early on.
Hacks are such a big deal, and I drove Uber years ago for a short time, but that's what it was really all about, was the hacks. It was everybody who just logs into that program and just sits there and waits, they're going to lose. Yeah. And I mean lose as in they're really not going to make as much money as they think they're going to. And of course, it's very saturated. The competition's super high, and guys are like, well, I'm different because I have water bottles and snacks that I can sell or whatever. And it's like, there's such a better way. Thinking strategically the hack is such a big thing.
And what's required for strategy is an end result.
Yeah.
Right? Strategy is a series of tactics taken to produce an intended outcome. And so people say strategy all the time. It's like, well, what's the outcome you're looking for? Now, I'm always careful the way I ask questions. I don't ask people like, do you have an end goal to this strategy? Because what does everybody say? Oh, yeah.
Of course.
You want to find out if they really have it? Ask them what it is. Like, what is your end goal? And then watch them swim for it, because they all of a sudden realize, like a cat thrown in the air, they've been in a bunch of tactics, but realize they're missing an important part of the strategy, which is, where is it taking me? And so they just float around. And so, by the way, the young person I was talking about, I was like, well, first thing, I want you to read this book. How long is it going to take you to read this book? I said, well, I actually had him buy 2 books. And I said, in case you finish the first one early, you can start reading the second. How long until you buy the book? It was amazing how tepid the commitment was to even get the book. And I was like, how long is it going to take you to read it? He said 3 weeks. That was a week ago. And I'm like, okay. Now, if let's say the difference between he and I, okay, if I had somebody similar difference between he and I, economically, business experience-wise, influence-wise, and they said, read a book, I would be like, so today, what is today, Friday? I would be like, well, can I call you Sunday morning? Because I'll be done with that book. So when people use the word hustle, most of them do not know what it means to work hard. They've never fought through the pain. They've quit when it's difficult. So it's just work. Stop making it fun and calling it hustle like you can get admiration for it. Like, no, just work and learn.
Powerful. I think that's 100% accurate.
And just offensive enough.
Yeah, right.
My business partner's like, Paul, sometimes you're too offensive. I'm like, I just need a little edge.
Some people don't like to hear the truth.
Yeah.
That's what it is. They have a very preconceived notion of something like the word hustle and what that means to them, and they're in their own little world. They don't want to hear what's real.
Well, instead of being one thing I do when I get a chance to speak to like large groups of financial advisors, I start with an apology. And I tell them, I'm going to offend you today. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, you guys are all going to be offended. And if you're not offended by a speaker, you should realize you wasted your time. They're like, what do you mean? Well, offense is you hearing something you've never heard before and then having to contend with yourself, internal for you, whether or not you need to change your behavior. That is offending. If I don't offend you, I wasted your time today. So both, I'm sorry for offending you, and in advance, you're welcome. And so for listeners, if you're thinking if you're kind of in that side hustle game, and one thing that people can do is that if you get a hold of someone like me or you, and like, hey, what should I do? I'm just getting started. Like, the thing that's going to actually help you the most is the thing that clearly you're not doing, that you didn't think about, that when they tell you about it, it is the truth will set you free, but first it's going to piss you off. Yeah. So be ready to be offended, because the offense is where you get through the other side of performance.
Absolutely. So let's throw a hypothetical out on the table here. So let's assume that somebody is doing the right thing. Now, I view investments like a snowball. Mm-hmm. I like to pack it at the top of the mountain and roll it down the hill until it's going faster than I can push it, right? So, but in the very beginning, it's the hardest, right? Getting it packed right and getting it rolling. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the very beginning here. Let's say, we start something up, we're at 1099, we're making income, we're deducting things now, and maybe I've got 10 grand to play with. What kind of direction would you recommend that somebody in that situation goes? What's the next best step for somebody who has a little bit of cash and wants to put a multiplier effect on that?
We talk about human capital, and the best thing I think somebody could do, and this is a little bit unpopular because everybody wants to, is like, well, you buy this thing and sell this, and maybe you could start a little business. You think of something like, I'm going to create something that kills this kind of bug that lives in people's house. Or I figured out a better mousetrap, and maybe you can begin manufacturing. But you don't know anything about manufacturing. You don't know anything about sales. I remember a guy who's had this special, humidifier sensor inside of a Bluetooth. It was a Bluetooth casing so that you could check it on your phone and without opening your humidor, all that. And he's like, and we're going to make millions of dollars. And I knew the guy had no background in manufacturing, et cetera. I was like, No, I didn't know. And I don't know anything about manufacturing either, but I didn't need to know to predict he was going to fail. And I could have been wrong, because lots of people start things they don't know anything about, but a lot of the time, because he didn't invest in the knowledge. And so where I go is increase your human capital first, which is what can you do to invest in you? And that might not take the whole 10 grand. But one example, we periodically have clients that say, I want to learn to invest. I want to start investing in real estate. I said, number one, if you want to make money, you don't invest in real estate. And they're like, what? I thought you were a fan of real estate. I said, I am. But if you treat it like an investment, you won't make money. You have to run it like a business.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, okay. And then what I do is I point them to one particular book I've referred people to. You may give me another one. It'd be better is, I think his name is David Green, but it's called Long Distance Real Estate Investing.
I love that one. Yeah.
And it's a long book, and I don't think it's well written. No offense, David. I love the content inside of it.
Right.
But it's not an easy book to get through, especially on audiobook. But he has so many little tips and tricks about how to manage contractors remotely, etc. And so I said, read that book first. And let me give you an idea of one of my good friends who does invest in real estate quite a bit. He looks at about 500 to 1,000 deals every year on his computer. And then he and his family, like it's an outing they do on weekends, they will see 50 to 100 in person every single year. And in the last 4 years, he's bought 2 properties. Now, if you're ready for that kind of work to run this business, you should absolutely do it. But if you think you're just going to put money down, pick a property, and it's going to work out well, you're not going to make the kind of money that you're thinking you're going to make. So that's kind of part one of the way I look at it. So first would be, it might just be getting the book first. It might be taking a course first. It might be just paying somebody to coach you to be better at your primary role so that you can make more money, because that's going to be the highest compounding factor, at least the first time around, the first $10,000 to invest in you. Now, the next $10,000 is going to depend on where your knowledge is. So if I would say real estate all day long if you've already built the team. I wouldn't touch real estate if you hadn't built the team of someone like you and the mortgage person and the property management company. And if you don't have all of those pieces put together, you have almost zero likelihood of having success. And I would much rather people have the tuition of learning before the transaction than the tuition that occurs during the transaction, which usually is much more expensive.
It's huge. It's absolutely huge. I just couldn't agree more. I think all side hustles and any investment needs to be treated like a business. Mm-hmm. And that's just what it is. You need to go into it with a plan.
That's it.
You got to have the resources. And I think investing in yourself in the beginning is the best advice that could be given, because that's really what it is. A lot of people want that easy. They want to plug in money like a thumb drive.
Yes.
And just have it download more.
And there are ways to do that. Like we manage, millions upon millions of dollars for our clients who need that. Why? Because many of them are so special. Like if you're on one of the executive or director levels at Microsoft, Amazon, or list other companies here, it is all consuming. Because you're making $900,000 to $1.5 million a year, like your total focus is owned by the company that's paying you that much money. You should not be thinking about investing in real estate, because you can be compromising your primary income unless you have like a spouse that can run it, something like that, which can work. Those folks use us for that wealth storage, and then they're going to explore the other things that they can run as a business once they kind of hit the eject button on that super all-consuming career. Because there are ways you can set it and forget it with investing in fund Roth IRAs, etc., and that will work. But it doesn't work the same as something you can deploy your human capital into. But what's producing the extra, look at real estate appreciation. It's very normal. Even in places like Kirkland have shot through the roof. Like you look at a home that could have been bought 10 years ago, it's appreciated like 7%. You could have built an equity-based portfolio and had no trouble and never have to replace a roof and never have to do any of the other stuff and get that return. But it's how you acquire it, knowing how to finance it, understanding the leverage, how to protect yourself from what leverage can do to you when it goes wrong. And then you could produce a much higher return. But that takes a lot more knowledge than just a set it and forget it, academically allocated, globally diversified portfolio. So there are the set and forget it options. But you do that when your primary occupation is all consuming and high compensating.
Yeah, definitely. It's huge. So you brought one of your books to give away today. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about that book?
Yeah, actually I have 11 copies with me for your listeners.
Excellent.
So the book is called Sound Financial Advice, which is a brilliant name, I must admit. Sound Financial Group.
I love it.
I'll tell you what, a regulator would have shot me down as it sounding promissory if it wasn't also the name of my firm. But in the book, what it does, it just follows one of these kind of Henry couples, business owner, architect, lost money in prior deals, but the embarrassment and shame that comes from you don't really want to run around and tell people that, like, even though you look a certain way in society, your balance sheet got hollowed out by bad investment decisions. And what do I do with my money now? And it follows this couple through in a very easy to read way. Most people probably get through the book in a couple hours. Very easy to read, where like certain parts of it, and these are all taken from actual client experiences, just a mesh of different clients, where it's like they come in and they're pissed at each other. Like, even though we do it all by Zoom now, this couple comes in the office and I actually go up on one of the buildings that they're in. But it's like they get angry with each other and they don't understand each other. They have different values when it comes to their money, and helping them journey through that. I think most people, when they start tackling their money, they're thinking the only thing they have to worry about in starting to talk about money in the future is their personal embarrassment of like opening the financial kimono. And what the book talks about is how it's actually a journey with your spouse into the future and being prepared for the future you're building, because too many people are not. And then it really does a great job of cratering some of the biggest misconceptions about money that people don't talk about. Like, I'll give one. Think about the 401k. It's the first thing everybody says. First thing you should do, max out your 401k. Totally max it out. It's like, well, wait a second. What if 10 years from now you want to start building a real estate investment portfolio? Well, now I did a whole series on this of how I think there's companies like you building up money in a 401k and getting you to max it out, because if you're working for a company that you could go compete with, well, they just helped you spend the last 8 years building up the $700,000 of capital you could have deployed to open up your own organization and compete with your employer, except it's all in 401k you can't get to until you're 59 and a half, and then you're too tired to go compete with your employer. So that's kind of part one. But part two is people say I'm going to be in a lower tax rate when I retire. I don't know about you, but I don't plan on being in a lower tax rate in my old age. Like, I'm not in a lower tax rate now than I was 10 years ago. And for many people, that's the objective. So do you plan on being like having more money or less money than you have today? Everybody's like more. And you think you'll be in a higher, lower tax rate. And I watch, and it's almost like people, you ever watch an engine like vapor lock and it just freezes up until you can get it to go again? I watch that happen in people's brains for like a second or two, and then they'll say, I guess higher. Right. They've just been telling you blindly you're going to be a lower tax rate, which might be true for 90% of America. But if you want to be in that top 10%, you're likely going to be in a higher tax rate in your old age. And if you are, so if I put money in my 401k when I was only paying 15% in income taxes, and now I'm taking it out at 35, that's not only a windfall for the IRS, but it'd be like if you and I went into a real estate deal together. And here's the deal you cut me. You say, Paul, we'll both put in some money, because that's what you're doing. You're taking the money you would have paid in tax and putting it in the plan. I'll put in 15%. Paul, you put in 85%. That sounds pretty good to me. And we're going to grow this money together? Yeah. What can we invest in, I would ask? And you'd be like, well, only paper assets. Can't do much else. Okay. When can we take it out? Well, definitely no earlier than 59 and a half, or I'm going to make you pay a 10% penalty. Okay. Is it always going to be the same split of 85 to 15? Like, no. Well, how much is it going to be? When you take it out, I'll let you know. Nobody would do that deal with you if that was what you were offering them.
No.
People do it every day with their 401k. And it's not that 401ks are bad, but think about how unreflective people have been at just setting the money in there, deploying it, letting it go, and then they don't look up. And then I meet them when they've got $800,000, $1.3 million in a 401k. And then I'm telling this, and you should see the ashen faces. Or as a guy who's actually one of our advisors, he was a client, he and his wife, they have more than enough money. They never have to work again. He got there when he was 48. He had reached DFI. He just didn't know it until we worked together. He had just saved his tail off. His name's Jeff Miller, and he talks about it on our podcast. If you look for Your Business, Your Wealth, I think we called it A Millionaire Next Door instead of The Millionaire Next Door. But he totally fits that profile. And when we got there, he's like, I had just been blindly putting money in a 401k. Nobody told me the power of a Roth 401k. Little things that add great deals of efficiency, and people are missing it because all the advisor cares about, not all they care about, they care very much about the people, but the paradigm from which they're educated is all about maximizing asset management. And if the choice is I can manage your money after tax, it's less money. Like, you think about if you get a 401k statement today and it says you got $100,000 in it, you do not have $100,000. I think it should be regulated by law that the IRS requires that they add on the statement 35% of it belongs to them. Oh, 45% if you're, still below 59.5. Because that'd be a very different statement to you when you look at it.
It is.
And nobody's teaching people the power of Roth, because had you done it all Roth, it would all be yours, but it would only be the, 70,000 or so. The financial institution, they want to manage the entire 100. They're increasing their profits by like 42, or total revenue by 42% with very little increase in expense, because they're managing your money and the IRS's money, and the IRS is perfectly happy to have you do it. You lose sleep when you are worried about the market. You pay people like me to make sure that you're doing the best possible you can with your money and the IRS's money. And those advisors are perfectly happy to manage both ends of it. So things like that are what we blow up in the book.
That makes sense. So let's ask a question to the audience then, and we'll give the books away based on the best answers.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and think of a question. I'll let you fire one off. What do you think would be a good question to ask the audience to win one of your books?
Ooh. Gosh, I didn't prepare with this one. I'm thinking of a good financial quiz question, because we haven't talked about it, but they can find it. How do you figure out how much capital at work you have to have in your old age to replace your current income? It's a very simple formula. The funny thing is, unfortunately, the financial press and most financial advisors don't actually teach this very simple mechanic to their clients, because they're not looking to teach the clients to have them become more capable. They want to teach them enough to know about the next product and have them purchase it. I mean, not like anybody's evil doing that behind the scenes. It's just where the financial incentives are. So if you can send in your formula for how you'll figure out you've got enough capital at work, this is outside of like your home equity, your primary residence equity, and it could be real estate investments, commercial real estate, stocks, bonds, whatever it is. But it is a number. And that number is universal across all of those assets. And if you really want to ace that answer, you can go to yourbusinessyourwealth.com and check out that. Probably listen to 2 or 3 episodes.
That's where the answer is.
It's going to be in there somewhere.
I love it. Well, Paul, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. Do you have any parting remarks, any final advice you want to give to the audience before we turn this thing off?
I mean, in the mash of the things that we've talked about, I would say play to your strengths, watch for your passions, because your strengths are going to help your weaknesses or not. Hire somebody else to handle your weaknesses. Outsource it. Find somebody on Fiverr to do whatever your weaknesses are. And so play to your strengths, pay attention to your passion, but don't follow it blindly, because there's all kinds of passionate people out there who are broke. And then I would say cultivate contentment in your personal life. There is almost nothing that will bring you as much joy as being able to shut down the narratives the media tries to throw at you. And frankly, for everyone listening, and nobody talks about this, very few do anyway, you have an enormous amount of agency with the way you choose to deploy your cash flow from whatever you're doing. If it's a side hustle, if it's your primary career, you're a business owner, you have so much choice in the way you deploy your capital. And so I've had people making $300,000 a year say, we just can't save any money. It just feels like it all kind of goes through. And I'm like, you know how many families in this country do perfectly fine, keep everybody sheltered and safe and everything else, making less than $100,000 a year, and you can't save on 300? It happens a lot more than you would realize. And most people, if they hear that, would be like, man, if I made $300,000 a year, I'd be retired in 4 years. And you probably wouldn't. But we need to take back our agency, stop getting seduced by everybody who wants us to deploy our capital so they can harvest it into their products, like Tesla. In fact, Tesla's brilliant. This would be the one last thing to leave everybody with in the way the media affects us. Let's go back 10 years. And let's say a guy, middle-aged, went out and purchased, say, a Maserati, $140,000 super luxurious sports car. What did everybody think of that guy back then?
It's a superstar throwing away money.
Well, a superstar. But okay, let me recategorize that. What did women say about that guy?
Oh, he's rich.
And he's compensating for something.
Right,
that's
right.
the darker side. Is everybody's like, that guy's a poser.
Right.
That guy is such a tool.
Like guys with big trucks.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, whatever it is. Like Elon Musk. Like, he may be a brilliant engineer and super great scientist, all that. You know what he is? Marketing genius.
Yeah.
Because he changed so that that middle-aged guy can go buy a $140,000 car, and he gets to show his environmentalism virtue. Because prior to that, the only thing that was available to virtue signal was a Prius. And now I can drive one of the fastest sports cars on the planet. He talked about in the Joe Rogan podcast about this thing called Limbic Resonance, and how things like social media mimic like a party in the way it feels. And that's when I realized, like, wait a second, that's what Tesla does. That vehicle, that acceleration, while it's silent, is the closest thing we have to running. Like, it resonates with our body. Like, a car's acceleration doesn't feel as natural as our legs, but that electric engine acceleration does. And now he's taken away the barrier of me looking like a jerk going and spending $140,000 on a car. All of that combined to harvest countless millions from the American public fully voluntarily to buy a vehicle they would have never bought 10 years prior. That is what we have to watch for. And if we first say what makes us content, we can defend ourselves against all of those spending decisions.
A lot of good advice out there. Paul, we'll put the links to your podcast and your book in the description below. Maybe we'll get some people to reach out to you with some questions.
And we can give you a couple of great white papers you can put on the episode page that people can download for free. And we just hope that, why we do these. We have no idea what comes from these. We had somebody reach out from a talk I did 3.5 years ago, and something made a big difference for them. And we hope that us being on these different shows, et cetera, my partner and I, just give people that chance to, as we say at the end of each of our podcasts, to help them better design and build their good life.
Absolutely. This is about flipping the switch of a different way to think about money. And I think people need to hear this because a lot of people are caught in a trap.
Amen.
And they can't get out. It's hard. It's hard. So thank you for doing what you do. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, and thank you for building the show and allowing us to come on here and trusting us with your audience.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul. Have a great day. And we look forward to hearing from you again.
Right on.
Awesome. Hey, guys. Thanks for watching this week's episode. We hope you really enjoyed it. If you love the people and stories of the Puget Sound, please support this podcast by reviewing us and rating us on Apple Podcasts. Stay tuned next week as we continue to curate the underground.